very good. An insightful question to ask what Ghandi did in prison, and he did a lot of reading and writing while he was in prison. He used his time well. And also the question about prayer. Prayer was essential to Ghandi. That's something, again, I don't know, critical to movie, doesn't bring out that. I think that he was a meditative man. He spent time in prayer. I think that he was rather rigorous with that in his schedule. It was an important part of it. I think that he really couldn't function without it. Vital part of his whole prayer life. Let me ask you, do people hear me easily in the back, or should I project more? Easily? Okay. An important question in relationship to the man. There's always, he was a very reflective person. Of course, you have to remember, in the whole Hindu tradition, meditation is vital, and that they have, a great sense of responsiveness in prayer. Our Western problem very often with prayer is that it's too cerebral. That it's more thinking and controlling. Our dominating image very often is that there's a God out there who we have to talk to and reach with arguments to get him to intervene on our behalf. That is, I think, very often the model of prayer that many people carry with them from childhood days. So that means it will be very wordy and at times manipulating and very often lacking what I would call a mysterious or paradoxical character. Whereas in the Eastern world, since one is trying to discover the true self, and by getting at the true self, one is going to find the great God, Brahman. The key phrases in Hinduism is Atman is Brahman. That is, the true self is God. It is a pantheistic type approach. Therefore, God is everywhere. God is within. God is my very being, so to speak. Therefore, prayer in the Eastern world is going to take on a very different character. It's not getting the attention of someone who's out there. It is opening our eyes and cutting through the illusions that prevent me from seeing the God who is close within. Therefore, meditation and silence would have a very great role to play in Hindu traditional prayer. Of course, it's also the Hindus who give us the TM, the Transcendental Meditation, the emphasis on breathing, and the repetition of the mantra. So Ghandi, I think, was very taken and influenced by those traditional forms of prayer in Hinduism. Again, I would see it as a great corrective. My inside article for this week is on prayer as imagining rather than prayer as thinking. One way of getting at that whole thing from our Western viewpoint, it seems to me, is to locate prayer in the imagination. Imagination being traditionally the center point of our being, where the affective and the intellective life come together, where the conscious and the unconscious meet. That's a traditional usage of the word imagination in various systems of thought. And therefore, it would seem as though if we located prayer in the imagination, we would come closer to that kind of receptive prayer that I think is prevalent in the Hindu world. Silence, receptivity, drinking in. The question is asked, is that related to mysticism? And I think that one would have to answer that mysticism really means a type of religious experience in which we sense the unity of all things. The mystic sees through the divisions and the dichotomies of life and sees the total oneness of the whole universe. That the things that seem to be barriers are false, and there is an underlying substratum of unity in the world. Their imagery is often light and so on. Now, as a matter of fact, it appears as though people have moved towards mystical experience both with Eastern style approaches, yoga exercises, and the Dharma analysis, and trying to see through the illusions, doing a lot of meditation like that, as well as people in the Western world seem to have done more traditional kinds of prayer as we know it, and have arrived at mystical experiences evidently from a slightly different route. To show you the difference in the two, you might take the dominant imagery of the East for the mystical experience is the drop in the ocean. That what happens in mystical experience and in the final salvation for people is that one is like a drop that falls into the ocean and then becomes simply part of the ocean. One's individual identity and consciousness is lost. One of the primary images in the Western world given to us by Teresa of Avila and others is of the spiritual marriage. So that the union, you see, is close, and the tightest kind of union that one can imagine, but individuality is not lost. So that in the Western world, the final mystical experience still seems to maintain that idea that we don't lose our personality, our character. And certainly that's our notion of heaven. Our notion of heaven is not the drop in the ocean that loses consciousness, but the wedding feast where we are most fully ourselves, where we are most individuated. So in our Western world, we say that love union individuates or personalizes. We expect to be more who we are in heaven. We expect to have our whole life taken with us through the barrier of death and to have an enriched life. Closer, deeper relationships, more love, more understanding, and not to have lost that as the drop in the ocean. So the mystical experience, many people associate simply with the East, and as though that's the only way to go, but we must remember there's a whole strong Western mystical tradition as well, with a slightly different character to it.
Some insight on doing some reading on Jesus himself. So much of what you describe about Ghandi, he was put me in mind of Christ himself. So would you say that Ghandi, if we could put him in a section, would you say he was worldly, social reformer, man of piety, prayer, involved man, a layman, one who free from himself and eventually ends in death, and who lived a life, maybe in that lifestyle, but similar to the lifestyle of Christ, both finally met death. Neither one had a particular job. I don't know what Ghandi did for a living.
Well, he was a lawyer and supported himself in South Africa as a lawyer, so he did have that profession, but so did Jesus. He was a carpenter. So they did both have a job and profession. There's a lot of parallels, as you said. There's a lot of parallels in the life of all of the great religious leaders. But there is a difference with Ghandi. Ghandi is not the founder of a religion or of a whole movement like Confucius and Lao Tzu and like Buddha and like Muhammad and like Moses and like Jesus. There was something more universal about what they had to say. Something that could catch and become, touch people of varying cultures, transcend individual interpretations and so on. So I don't think that I would want to link Ghandi with those founders of religion. Oh, I see him as one growing out of his own Hindu tradition and bringing it far along. But I think that the defects in Ghandi, despite the movie, are really all too evident as one reads the autobiography and reads the commentary on his life and so on. I mean, the man is, as I say, is an ethical giant, and he has refined certain important virtues to a high degree. But as far as achieving a totally integrated personality as we think of Jesus having, I think we don't see that. And I think that is most evident in his relationship with his wife. He says himself at times, and he's very candid at times about how cruelly he treated his wife. And he had really terrible problems with his children and seemed to just be so demanding of them and so on. And that's an area of his life that, as I tried to explain in the lecture, is not just accidental, I don't think. I think it's got to do with precisely the way he tried to deal with his demons, which in our psychological language means largely repression. Keep them all under control. It's hard to imagine a more disciplined person than Ghandi was. And the discipline was released for public service. But the demons came back to haunt him in his personal relationships. I think that's a way of saying it. Therefore, in a sense, he doesn't seem to qualify the same level as the world's founders of the world's great religious traditions, although someone like Moses would obviously have his faults as well. And Muhammad didn't do all that great by women either, and so on. So, and maybe that's not the only criteria, but there wasn't the push to found that religion. He worked out of his own tradition, I think. And
his religion basically was to do for all these people, all these Indians.
Well, his religion is self-realization. They can't get away from that. I won't buy that he was just a social reformer. That's a real mistake. He says it over and over. There's no reason to deny it. What is religion for him? It is self-realization. What's self-realization? That is getting in touch with God. That's why the prayer question is so important. At one point in my lecture, I remember thinking, geez, I haven't even mentioned prayer and meditation, and it's such an important part of his life. It is really wrong to think of him as an ethical reformer. If you go watch that movie, and keep some of this in mind, you can't help but ask, but what motivated the man? How could he be that serene? How could he be that powerful? How could he be that confident? And so on. And I think the answer comes out in two ways. One, he wasn't that confident and serene always. He wasn't that plaster saint like that. He had his struggles and difficult times. And the other part of the answer is that he was fighting for self-realization, that he was in touch with the higher power, the invisible force of the world. And he did that through his religious tradition. I think that's the key. That's the whole burden of my statement.
The fact that he fasted until he gets this 35-cent raise for these people or whatever it was he was trying to get them out. He was concerned about people, large numbers of people.
Oh yeah, this translated into action, no doubt about it. And that would be one of my correctives again that maybe I didn't bring out enough. I hope in my answer that I'll say what the question was. He was saying about the man was obviously involved in getting the 35% pay raise for the mill workers and moving masses of people and so on. And that's absolutely true. And that seems to be one of the geniuses of the man, that his religion was not private, that his religion moved him to constructive action. We often think of Hinduism as being something that keeps from action. One of the theories is the reason we've got science in the Western world and don't have it in the East is because our Western religions, even though we got it from the Middle East to begin with, but it's tinged with Greek thought, Roman thought, and all that, is that we had the idea that the world is our workshop, that God put us on here to use our brains to transform the world and create it, make a better world. In the East, the problem generally was seen, how do you adjust to the world as it is? I always like to say in the West, if you're too hot, you make an air conditioner. In the East, if you're too hot, you learn to take it. Well, that's the general tendency, and that's why you don't have the same industrial revolution and scientific revolution, at least one reason, in the East. But Gandhi moved beyond that. That's why it's careful to say that he reinterpreted his scriptures. He refocused the dominant thrust of Hinduism to a social revolution. He saw renounce the fruits of action as a means of liberating his people. You get conflicting messages in the autobiography. There's some places where he will say that at a very early age, he wanted to free his people. that's what drove him in a sense. And I suppose the cynics would say, well, that's what he really wanted to do. That's what he was after from the age 5 on, and that everything else he did just buttressed that, and he found a convenient religion to one religious idea out of his own tradition that would allow him to do that. I myself am of the opinion that that is an overly cynical viewpoint of Gandhi, and that indeed he did function in another way, and that is that my reading is, and people can disagree with this, is that there was a real wellspring of religion inside of him, and that flowered in social action. And that's precisely what moved him or enabled him to be able to free the people. Public service was where he thought self-realization would take him.
Is fasting that he believes
well, not necessarily to the Buddhists, but to the God. He thought that fasting was good for one because it purified one of illusion. Because any time you got rid of grasping, of attachments, and all of that you moved closer to the truth of life. And when you moved closer to truth, to who you really were, saw through the illusion, you would actually then become closer to God. It's interesting, while he fasted, his moods would swing. He would get depressed, and there were times then when he would feel more peaceful and together. And it wasn't just a smooth road like, good, each day you fasted, you got closer to God. He went through rather violent mood swings while this went on. And maybe even illusions and so on would get into his head, which is not surprising, Sometimes, a fever of 101, and you think you're Buddha or something, Light is a tree. So that it seems to me that didn't always function in terms of getting rid of illusions for him, but yet he saw it, as I try to say, in two ways. One as a means of self-realization, and the other as a political weapon to get things done.
Do you think that he carried fasting too far? I mean, was he willing to...
Oh, he's ready to go to death. Yes. He's willing to kill his son for that. He wouldn't let him give food to his son. One occasion his son was dying, and they said he has to have food. Has to have this, and he needed broth, meat, they wanted to give him. He wouldn't let him. He took the chance that he would die. As a matter of fact, he didn't die, but he was ready to have his son die rather than feed him meat. He wasn't kidding, no. No, he was a man of extreme principle. Yeah, that's a remarkable thing. He was ready to let his son die.
As efforts to die, as you call it, did he, like Kant, who the whole system is worldwide, did he believe concerned about the whole world, and he was concerned with India?
Good question. Did he come up with a total system, or is he concerned with just India? First, I would say this, that I don't think he was very systematic. I think he was an ad hoc responder to the situation. I think he made it up as he went along a lot of times. That's not to say he didn't have maybe a general idea that he wanted to free his people, but as to how he was going to do it in any given situation, he listened to the inner voice. He expected that if he was purified and in touch with reality, the inner voice would tell him what to do. And I think that's what happened. I think that's really the interpretation of that first fast. Like he said, I read it to you, he said, it came to me in a flash. I didn't plan it. He just given his talk, and suddenly he finds himself saying, I'm not going to eat until this is settled. Now, were there precedents in his mind? Were other people who have done it that had influenced him? I don't know. But in the first part of the answer to your question, I do not think that he had a total system, neither an intellectual system nor a practical system that he was following. He was not a dogmatist in that way, in any way. I see him as a very pragmatic politician, ready to give and take. Yeah. You know that 35% grade, you know what he settled for when he stopped the fast? I don't know if I can find that quickly to read it to you now. It's so complicated. But they didn't get the 35%. But he found a way out. They got 35% for one day. No, so he could say that he kept it. And then they got like 20 cents for the next, 27 cents for the next weeks or so. And then there would be an arbitration that would come in to see if they would end up getting the 35%. And his talk was, you know, that's okay. We got that. He had to have it. I think my answer stands to the other question. If he couldn't have got something like that, I think he would have fasted to death. But once it was there in any kind of way, he's ready to back off and get ready for the next fight. It was said that he could really only handle one major problem at a time. He wanted to devote his attention totally to one project and then get that done and resolved. There's a whole pattern that you can see over and over of him learning the problem, immersing himself in it, getting on the scene. You know, you sort of think of Martin Luther King in our own country this way, and then getting there and figuring out what to do, and it's not all that clear. There's last-minute strategy, and you know, how are we going to handle it, and then it just happens. You know, in the movie, it's neat this way. There's the first time they're on this march, and the British are going to come charging at them on horses. They don't know what they're going to do. They're going to get trampled. And one guy behind him in the march, he's leading it. He says, "Everyone down. They won't trample us." Evidently, he knew that horses wouldn't run on people. So everyone down, and horses come up and stop. Well, you know, I couldn't find any place else a corroboration of that. I presume Attenborough was very careful with historical details, so I just presume it's true. But the point that I'm getting at is the ad hoc character of a lot of the strategies they use, not an overall strategy at all. Then the question of whether he thought larger than that, I think his energies were spent in freeing India, liberating his people, and even near the end, it sort of ran out. You know, I mean, I think by the end, he was 78 years old. In a sense, you know, he fasted in order to get the Muslims and the Hindus back together, not fighting. But in a sense, you have the feeling it passed him by that point. So it seems to me his life energy went into that, and he didn't have time to think about freeing other people around the world. I don't think.
What became of his wife?
But let me see. If the question is asked what became of his wife and children. I don't. His wife stayed with him a lot of times. She was herself thrown in prison. He had the one son became a derelict. One son renounced him. Maybe some people know this better than I do. One son is a philosopher. I was talking to a student out at the University of Washington the other day about this, and she said that she heard his son lecture. He was and he became a Western-style philosopher. He renounced his Eastern roots, and she actually heard him. Said he was a terrible lecturer. Read from a book that he had written, and really wasn't all that great. And I think that his offspring often were very critical of their father. Yes.
Where does real happiness come into his whole religion? I mean, it sounds like just peace, so he just kind of there. Any kind of joy or happiness involved in the religion.
Yeah, the question of joy or happiness in the religion. One aspect of that is a sense of humor. Erickson's of the opinion that the autobiography messes up in the translation. We lose the humorous aspect of it. And that he tried to read it or got people to explain it to him in the original language it was written in, and you could see much more of the man's light touch in that. Interestingly enough, this comes out in the movie, and the lines won't come to you now, but something when he was fasting, some tremendous event occurred, some really good thing, and it was almost the goodness was getting, oh yeah, he wanted them to stop the whole Satyagraha campaign because he was afraid that the violence was getting a hold of it and that his people weren't ready or weren't disciplined enough. So and he's fasting there to death, and they come in and tell him, hey, it's stopped. All the resistance is stopped. No one's resisting any place. And he's there half dying and says, maybe I've gone too far. You get touches of the humor in his life that way. So there is he seemed to have a good sense of humor. And that would be a lighter touch. I think his energy level might bear on what you use. A great walker. Walked all the time, and again, that comes out of the movie when he's on his march, 40 miles to the sea. You see him take it off, walking in front of everybody, at a fast pace. As though he's going to trot all the way to the sea. And so there was sort of that energy that exuded from him that might bear a little bit on this question of joy. The man was involved in a lot of difficult situations. I mean, I don't think he sat around and had a beer after the mill struck, He never said, well, let's go for the night and let's have a full meal of steak and potatoes or something. He wasn't into that kind of thing. I would say if there's something of joy in all of it, it is in the quiet sense that one is doing one's duty, responding to the call. The man felt singularly called. I think that if I would see a joy in what I read in the autobiography of someone, it's there. Quiet, kind of reserved, deep joy that knows that one's conscience is clear, that one is principled, and one is making the proper effort in life. There was no wild revelry. He was into that for a while he was in England, took dancing lessons, and started to learn how to play the violin, dressed in a terrific way, wanted to wear the finest things. He went through his gentleman period, where he wanted the best of things. He wanted to fit into the higher elite society of England. And maybe at that time he was sort of, what do I want to say, let go of the pit.
Here in the West, we have like celebrating Christmas, we celebrate this island, and I see them, after maybe 1 to 6 before they sit down with his friends and celebrate a meal, or even though it's vegetarian, something that's basic.
Well, I think there was a camaraderie in the ashrams. The ashrams are communities. They're sort of a prototype of the communes that we had in the United States. And my vision of that would be that there was a tremendous comradeship there. People worked together and lived a simple life together and did their spinning together. The spinning wheel became crucial. There was a crucial symbol. I better explain that as I'm going on with this answer here. But they were dependent economically. The problem was cloth. That is, they were the producers of cloth, and then the cloth began to be produced cheaper in England, so everyone who needed cloth bought it in England. Therefore, the people were out of work in India. That was sort of a summary of the economic reality. And Ghandi overcame that problem and asserted the Indian self-reliance by getting everyone to go back to the spinning wheel. And so he began himself and encouraged others, and it became the symbol of the revolution and the liberation of the country, the spinning wheel. And often you see him sitting there, and he learned to do it himself. He wasn't very good at it, but he would insist on accomplishing this himself. It's interesting, Ben Kingsley, who played Ghandi in the movie, as part of his method training for him, learned to do the spinning wheel the same way as Ghandi had done it, and said that it was very good for the soul somehow to be involved in doing it. So it accomplished two things. It helped them. At one point, they show in the movie this big deal where he tells this vast crowd that take off all the clothes that you have that were from England, cloth from England, and let's burn it. They burned this day. He said, let's make a fire. They'll see it all the way to London. And gets all the stuff burning, and then he gets back, we're going to make our own cloth now and make our own clothes. So I was on the ashrams and the life there, the simple life, illustrated by the spinning wheel, where I think there was this joy. It wouldn't be a drunken bash like we might think of, but as a quieter kind of celebration of the simple life. That's, again, my sense of it, and of how they would have known the joy. Quieter kind of joy, I think. He thought they could be combined. He had a great feel for the law. He was respectful in a sense in the court. He wanted the judge to give the full sentence. There was a time when he realized that you couldn't play games with the law, that truthfulness somehow and knowledge of the law could go together somehow. I'm not coming up with a quote or the exact story situation here, but I remember clear impression in my mind that he had reconciled those two kinds of ideas. He knew that there was a lot of other game playing that went on and so on, but I think he felt that the most effective weapon was always the truth. That could be used effectively to gain justice. But the law, he used that. He would look for loopholes. In South Africa, he found loopholes. He would argue in front of the officials that, no, the law says we can do a particular thing, and he would insist on it. He would insist on trying to find the ways in which the law could work for them. Yeah, I think it's more that way. Yeah. Law, yeah. It doesn't seem to me that's such a characteristic word. If we would say God is love, traditionally, wouldn't we? Ghandi would start out saying God is truth. And then later on, truth is God. Surely if there's a characteristic expression for God, it's not love for God, it's truth. Which fits in with the whole idea of realization, understanding. See, self-realization. Love, is a more characteristic word for self-fulfillment, isn't it? If indeed the myth is that we were chopped in half and we're looking for our better half, from now on, if that's the originating myth, which I think does dominate our sense, then it's love that propels us outward to find the other half, and it's love that enables us to interact with the other half and to find our fulfillment. We're empty without the opposite sex. We're cut off from something important. Therefore, that has to be brought in. But I don't think that is the fundamental root problem of the Eastern world. It is illusion. It is not seeing. It's living in contradiction. And that therefore the task is to see through, to realize, to see. And therefore the dominant characteristic one is finding is truth, not love. I don't say that he didn't have any notion of love at all. There was that phrase I used, and I remember I highlighted it and then never explained it, that you had to renounce friendship except unless you could gain the whole world. Erickson has this image that Ghandi starts out that he's very interested in working on one relationship. Like he had to work on his relationship with his father. And surely there was love there. And I think he would say that he loved his father. I don't think he would have any trouble with that. Then he'd work on the relationship with his mother. Then there was the question of relationship with his friend, the sort of hellion that he ran around with. But then it seemed as though the dialogue partner became gradually larger. Like then it became the people in the ashram. In that little community. Then it became like the people in all of India. And then there's that whole idea in there, well, the whole world. In other words, what seems to happen to him is that his love, which couldn't really find proper fulfillment with his wife, needed some object out there, and the only thing that it could go towards was the whole of the world. Not unlike the talk of celibacy in certain circles, that the celibate gives up love of one person so that the celibate can love everyone, which is often just a cover-up for not loving anyone. It actually often happens. At least that's the great danger, such temptation that's involved in that kind of situation. But it seems to me that was Gandhi's tendency, that the scope of his love, as we would say it, or maybe he'd like to say care or concern, enlarged as he went along. And it became maybe at least all of India, I would say that. It became the masses of India, the real object of his care and concern and energy, not so much his family. And whether he ever got to the whole world, I don't have that sense. I think it's sort of India was it, sort of the parameters of where his actual care was directed. Truth more than love, surely. But I think, our word love is so debased. What does it mean? I think that you would say, by all accounts, that he showed tremendous concern, care, gave of himself, sacrifice. Interesting thing. I don't know, did people read in the Commonweal the review of the movie? It's very harsh on the actor for the deliverance of the last line. The last line, oh God, God. And the reviewer says that that's totally missed. It comes out bland. It doesn't come out like, oh my God, this is the end, the destiny is here. And it doesn't come out as though he was now talking to the one who was at the center of his being. Again, it's a way in which I think the movie misses the whole religious dimension of the man. And it comes out, as he says, it's bland, like you can't figure out what the emotion is, like, oh God, God. He would reproduce that better than I'm doing it here, but it does come out bland in a way, and one wonders, what's that of a life of a man who is in touch? My sense is that it should have come out of the depths, and did. I mean, it's just a movie that falsifies the relationship that he really had. So I think it was care, concern, orientation to God there. Gandhi is very. I've taught this Gandhi material many times to people in various situations, and I know that it's extremely disturbing to people. It's disturbing because as a package, it doesn't make any sense to us. I mean, someone doesn't want to heighten one sadistic element in one's sexuality. I mean, one doesn't really want to move in that direction in life. It sounds as though the renunciation was not worth it in a way, personally, like he was a truncated individual. And that's why, my opinion is that almost always in dealing with Eastern thought, the Buddha, Chinese thought, Confucius, and so on, those people can only be corrective to us. I don't think they become total model. I don't think they can work that way. one can't just jump into that lifestyle or that approach. We're too programmed in another direction. I think some of the disgust that people feel, or the revulsion, or maybe that's too strong a word, and the distance from these ideas comes from that. And my own sense is that if one can use it as a corrective, then it functions a lot better. You know, the corrective would be, well, where could I use some renunciation in my life, or some discipline, or get off the success kick somehow. It's still time for another question for anybody who is. Let's see if anyone has a question that didn't get a chance yet. Anyone who hasn't had a chance want to say something or comment, question, so on? No. The question is asked, did he realize his power and how effectively did he use it? I think he knew his power tremendously. I think he knew exactly what he was about. Yeah, but it was all together. I think the power came from his religious, spiritual side, but he knew the political consequences, and he used it. 17 fasts to death, each time calculated at a given moment to win a victory of some sort. He knew that he moved the masses. I mean, you have to be blind for that. I mean, when he came into town, he became a national hero. You know, he just was an important man. Thousands of people would follow him, hung on his every word. He would say when he fasted in the later years, all of India was on edge. Everybody knew that the Mahatma was the great soul when he was fasting. And would he die? Please don't let him die. Everyone was coming. You know, in the movie it's portrayed by people coming, Muslims coming with their arms, throwing them down and saying, you know, hey, look, I won't fight. Take something to eat. You know. And in the second part of your question, it seems to me that he really did use the power effectively. I don't think there's many people who have done more than that, who have given the world an example of nonviolence, who lived it out, you know, who showed a spiritual side to life, and who was effective in the human struggle for freedom. So I have to think, yeah, that he used it very effectively. I think that we have advertised 9:30. I think we better go. I want to thank everybody. Look, next week, if we're moving in here, I'll leave a sign on the door. I sort of hope we can. And I'm told that we're dealing with Martin Luther King next week. So we'll follow the schedule.